You're watching 13 WMAZ, straight from the heart.
About 11 inches of rain have fallen here in the past 24 hours.
The first of the 7 bridges has been washed
Almost
away.
everything in the town has been flooded out.
The dangers of this devastating
Pack
flood.
up what you can and head out. The evacuation
And the
is
truck,
underway.
of course, was swept away. It made it all the way under Rocky Creek.
The interstate become a lake, stressed how dangerous
Now
the
they
flooding
recovered
is.
the body of one woman.
Authorities say her husband and baby are still down there.
Flooding across Georgia is now blamed for 18 deaths.
Hello, I'm Frank Malloy. It has been 10 years since a tropical storm changed our lives. Alberto was the first named storm of the season. It formed off the coast of Cuba on June 30th. It came ashore at Destin, Florida on July the 3rd and tracked north to Atlanta, where it stalled, and the rain just kept coming.
I got on the phone with my chief, Chief Henson, and I'll never forget that telephone call I made to him that night from the EOC, and I told him, Chief, these are the biggest raindrops I've ever seen.
Alberto caused record rains in Macon and all across central Georgia. Between July 3rd and July 7th, more than 27 inches of rain had fallen on some parts of the state. The rain turned High Falls in Monroe County into a raging river.
We lost a lot of houses here in High Falls, and it's just an overall disaster.
Our house, you can barely see. The rooftop is there.
This bridge was swept away just hours after news crews shot this video. The raging waters then swept south.
The next morning, as I was driving to work, the rain was up even with the doors on my truck at that time, and I knew then that we were having a big rain.
It was almost like a slow motion effect of things. Roads begin to close, you see bridges begin to become impassable, and people were having difficulties traveling a normal way. So life as we knew it just a few days ago had begun to change.
I was working midnight shift when the rains came, and that there was some concern about the flooding when the water started to rise. And I remember distinctly there was some concern that the dam at Tobesofsky might fail.
We were more concerned about the houses that were getting swept out down Delano Drive, right behind the waterworks.
Most of the people living on Delano Drive left quickly, leaving everything behind. One man was busy working with the ambulance service, but when his wife called to say the river was taking over their home, everything changed forever. Ben Hoover has their story.
The water was rising fast. Yeah. We had hardwood floors. We don't have them anymore.
There are a lot of things the Cheek family doesn't have today. 10 years ago, the flood of '94 took them away.
It was devastating.
Well, you truly didn't know if you were going to even have a house to come back to.
Louie and Brenda Cheek were first-time homeowners and first-time parents to 8-year-old Tommy, who's now 18, when heavy rains from Tropical Storm Alberto flooded their new home.
It said initially you just thought, let's just get out of here, right?
Initially, that was the first thought. The first thought was, there really wasn't anything to come back to. It was completely destroyed.
You trust in God to give you the courage to take each day one day at a time, and to love your friends that are there to help you, not only your friends but your family and even strangers.
A guy walked up to us one day, and he said, I work with a bank in Macon. Here's some information. We want you to come over. There's no charge.
The Cheeks lost nearly everything in the flood, only to gain a new understanding on life.
You just have to pick up and go and continue, as man has done, over the years.
Stuff happens, and you just have to, start all over again and rebuild.
And I just thank God every day that we're here as a family. We're here in our house again.
The water came,
and it was gone.
And changed this family and many others forever.
I don't ever go to bed with a thunderstorm or heavy rain and go, do I need to go to sleep? That never crosses my mind. But if we ever get into that cycle again of weeks and weeks of rain, and then, the weather starts showing that there's depressions and whatnot, then, yeah, I'm sure we'll sit up and think about it. We just won't be that young.
Ben Hoover, 13 WMAZ, Eyewitness News.
By the time the disaster was over, 12,000 homes and businesses were destroyed or severely damaged. But for the people of Macon, the worst was yet to come.
Then we started getting concerned about the waterworks. So we drove out to the waterworks, and you could see the water rising.
South to Warner Robins, 5 major dams burst on Wednesday, July 6th.
You couldn't hear nothing but the water just running through my yard like a river.
Torrents of water from area lakes forced people to evacuate by boat.
I knew I had trouble when my neighbor was floating by me in a boat. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. He said, "Fred, it's time to get out."
I was not EMA director at the time, and that promotion came to me at around 3 o'clock that morning. It's called a battlefield promotion. 200 houses to be affected, and all the other businesses. Surprised me that Warner Robins and Perry was cut off. It took us over 3 hours to get from one municipality to the other.
Once things dried out, Warner Robins started to recover. But for Macon and cities south, we were just starting to realize the threat from the Ocmulgee and the Flint.
We had the tragic loss of a couple of lives out at Old Pinona Plaza Shopping Center.
I was only 4 years old at the time of the flood. I distinctly remember being afraid that my parents would not be able to get to school to pick me up because of the water. They assured me that they would get to me no matter what, and I felt much better.
The calm and winding Ocmulgee River was suddenly a dangerous weapon of destruction. 2 of Macon's 3 bridges were closed, and the threat of the levee breaking at Central City Park created a frenzy of sandbagging and desperate hopes that we could somehow hold the river back.
You can also see some inmates that were brought in from the Bibb County Law Enforcement Center. They're out here helping sandbag up the roadway to try to minimize damage if the levee does break.
We knew the water was rising, but we did not realize what was to come in the next 30 days.
Here's what was to come for the Ocmulgee. The flood stage is 18 feet. The Ocmulgee crested on July 7th at 35 feet 4 inches. The Flint River, flood stage 20 feet. The Flint crested on July 8th at an unbelievable 35 feet. Both were new records.
People just don't think. They don't realize how dangerous water is, and moving water, particularly the old ford streams. We've had deaths with people just going across the stream and not realizing how fast the water was coming or how deep it was, and they fall down and they think they can get up and they can't.
This is an Eyewitness News special report.
And good evening, everybody. I'm Frank Malloy, back with you as we continue our coverage of the flood crisis here of the summer of 1994. We're now getting ready to go live to Liz Jarvis. She is standing by live at Rocky Creek, where I understand, Liz, they are searching for some bodies in that area. Is that correct?
Yes, Frank, as we have been reporting to you earlier, that a truck went in last night. Now, they recovered the body of one woman, but they feared that there was another man and possibly a child inside.
Remarkably, only 2 people died in Macon. A man and a woman who were out looking at the floodwaters off Rocky Creek Road were swept away. Their bodies weren't found until the next day. But that same deadly story played out across the state. 31 people died during the flooding in Georgia. Most of those fatalities involved people trying to get from one place to another. By July 6th, most of us were cut off. Bridges connecting parts of town were underwater. And for the first time in history, parts of Interstate 75 and Interstate 16 were shut down. Thousands of commuters were stranded.
Everything here is closed.
You think by tomorrow it'll be open?
I have no idea if the
Go get a motel, is that what you're saying?
When we first started getting reports and speculation that some bridges were going to be washed out is when we started thinking, well, boy, this is really going to be serious. And of course, at the time, I don't think we really knew how high the water was going to get or how much damage it was going to do.
Some of the roads were able to be opened immediately in less than 24 hours to some sections of roadways. Even though there were detours keeping the traffic moving at all times, it took up to a year to 18 months to complete all repairs.
Plenty of work, lots of work to do. Work cut out for us.
Overall, after everything was said and done, it was in the neighborhood of $100 million.
Macon's levee broke at 8 p.m. Wednesday, July 6th. The 30-foot-tall, 1-mile-long levee runs from the Otis Redding Bridge south to the industrial park. If water surged over the levee, a power station near Central City Park could have been damaged. That would have meant no power at the medical center. The Savannah District of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers brought 20,000 sandbags and 3 teams to Macon in an attempt to stabilize the Macon levee. Inmates and city workers were stacking those sandbags Wednesday night, both before and after the levee broke. Luckily, the power outage didn't happen.
When the chips are down, you know, people can come together and do whatever because we have people with talents and skills and resources.
We had power in Macon, but there was another vital necessity we would all learn to live without, and the disaster continued to spread south.
I don't know how you can prepare to lose your entire water supply for nearly a 3-week period.
On July 5th, my wife and I, along with 12 teenagers, opened a Red Cross shelter. Shortly after we opened, the interstate I-75 was closed both north and south of Byron, so we were isolated. We ended up with about 175 people.
If we thought it was bad along the Ocmulgee, it seemed worse for people living along the Flint. Americus had 21 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. Montezuma and Newton were totally engulfed. And in Albany, the state university was destroyed by floodwaters, and entire neighborhoods were underwater. Every bridge in Albany was underwater, and the town was actually cut in 2. President Bill Clinton declared 55 Georgia counties federal disaster areas. A staggering $59 million went to help Georgia families rebuild.
We know this is going to be a personal agony for tens of thousands of people, but we will do the best we can to help you put your lives back together.
He knew about the number of deaths in Sumter County. He knew how quickly it hit Bibb County. He knew about Montezuma.
We had areas down in Albany that were greatly affected, and after the flood waters receded, they fixed their homes, and they thought, well, a 500-year flood, we won't have this problem again in our lifetime, and they were flooded out again in 1998.
The signs are still very visible in the town of Montezuma. The people of the town did all they could to save their historic downtown. 10 years later, if you visit Montezuma, you'll hear some people call their home the town that refused to drown.
We came in the store and we started putting things on higher shelves because once before there had been water in the store.
Nancy Hill and her husband Yancey hoped they could save something from their downtown department store in the heart of Montezuma, but there was simply no way to beat the forces of nature.
Well, the water kept coming, and pretty soon it was up around our ankles and then around our waist, and then when it got up to here, and these big heavy oak tables were floating, we thought maybe we better get out.
Getting out was the only option for downtown business owners, but getting out meant leaving their livelihoods behind.
When the water started coming in here, we were trying to move stuff off the lot out there, and we had forgotten about these in here on the showroom, and when we had the opportunity to move them, the water got so deep here it wasn't any need to.
The Flint River overtook this century-old town in a matter of hours.
I walked out here on this porch, and it was way over my head, down there where you're standing at, so I had to swim about probably close to 40, 50 yards about before I could touch the ground again.
Water submerged every downtown business.
For 5 days, we would come downtown and look at all this water, but we couldn't see into the store, so we really didn't know what was happening to it.
Once the water went down, the damage left behind was overwhelming. Some questioned whether Montezuma could survive, but giving up was never an option.
We got together while the water was still in here and decided that we were going to go on. We were not just going to forget it and let the town dry up and blow away.
Instead, it was time to get back to work. Cleanup efforts started immediately. Volunteers came from around the country to help the people of Montezuma reclaim their lives. Now, 10 years later, many downtown businesses are still doing business just like they always have. And new businesses have come to town. The recovery is really remarkable. But even a decade later, the fear of another flood lingers.
If that ever happens again, I'm going to open this door and the back door and go to Atlanta.
On top of the flooding, Montezuma had to deal with a devastating fire at one of the town's largest employers. It was Southern Frozen Foods back in 1994. They had several locations around town, and this building was called the Gold King plant. The fire destroyed the entire building. Fire crews had trouble reaching the place because of the flood. It was one of the largest employers in the county back then. Today, it's Birdseye Frozen Foods, and 250 people still work there.
Day in and day out, 24 hours around the clock, people were working. It was just unreal, those people that committed their time and life and services.
Now, this map shows you the disaster declaration counties. As you can tell, almost a third of the state was actually affected. In fact, the flood of 1994 turned into the worst disaster in Georgia's recorded history. 7,000 federal grants went to uninsured homeowners. $65 million federal dollars rebuilt Albany State College. And it took almost $13 million to replace the infrastructure in Albany. In Macon, the disaster lasted for weeks. That's how long we were without water. And for those of us in the media, it was a once-in-a-lifetime moment.
You could look to your left and look to your right, and you could see the water rising up to the roadway, and you're going, okay, oh my God, that's going to happen to me next. I'm here, I'm alone, no one knows where I am, and I'm going to be the next story.
As we rode down I-75, we saw the devastation to Macon at Rocky Creek Road and Pierce Avenue. When we arrived in Albany, the areas where the flood had taken its toll were colored a dusty brown. We removed refrigerators full of rotted food and carried ruined furniture, carpet, and clothing from several of the flood-damaged homes. The smell of rotting food, sewage, and decaying things was absolutely overpowering.
For a week, the incredible sights and sounds of the flood of 1994 made national, even international news.
Al Zimmerman of our station WMAZ in Macon joins us with the latest. Good morning.
Good morning, Harry. About 11 inches of rain have fallen here in the central Georgia area in the past 24 hours. Now, that beats the old record of 8 inches set back in 1928. Behind me, you see evidence of those torrential rains, cars buried by water. And while everything seems rather peaceful right now, it wasn't last night. The body of a woman, the first known victim of the central Georgia flooding. She was a passenger in a pickup truck that's somewhere deep beneath this swirling floodwater. Authorities say her husband and baby are still down there somewhere.
A citizen came up to me and told me that a vehicle went over and went under. Of course, I immediately ran to the area, but I knew right off it was not a thing in the world I could do. It's such a feeling of helplessness, you know.
The driver of the pickup was on a joyride through this shopping center parking lot covered with water. Unknowingly, he ran the truck into a 20-foot storm drain.
I run over there, me and another fellow run over there, but there was nothing we could do. Just sit down and watch them go down.
More than 10 inches of rain have come down hard on this part of the country, turning this popular tourist spot, High Falls State Park, into a raging river, while breaking through bridges and dams all over Georgia's heartland.
We was wondering if the house was going to be here much longer. We was really afraid that it was going to get inside the house.
Some homeowners had to swim to safety, while some business owners, like this local car auctioneer, are watching profits wash away.
We have a mess out here. We have about 300 cars underwater. It's flooded, worst I've ever seen. We've been here 10 years and never seen anything like this.
We had made the decision that we needed to stay on the air to let people know what was going, so we were dispatching crews. The sales department and I were starting to man the telephone so that the real people, the real news people, could get out and do their job. And it was just kind of a madhouse.
I could not get to Macon because the bridges were out. So I just called the newsroom and asked if there was anything I could do in Houston County, and they said yes, to get to the Houston County Bureau, which at that time was on Watson Boulevard. We were actually the last people off of the 96th bridge before it became an island. We were shooting some video, and it was like a big orange sea. And it was just unbelievable. I'll never forget it.
Tuesday, July 5th, I started broadcasting special reports, and we didn't go off the air for the next 24 hours. I talked to just about every emergency person in central Georgia during that time. All of them had but one mission: keeping people safe. Joining us live now over the telephones, Monroe County Sheriff's Deputy Lieutenant Chip Dunn to update us on the situation. Chip, tell us right now, how are things standing in Monroe County?
Hi, good evening, Frank. Well, right now, water's
starting to recede a little bit in some of the areas, but of course that doesn't mean that the conditions are safe around here. We have had another pretty strong thunderstorm in the last hour.
Once that people understood the seriousness of the situation, they were paying attention. But I think they were also, when they were through focusing on their families, their loved ones, and people that they knew there, then they were being concerned with, well, okay, how do I move around? How can I go from here to there? And a lot of what I did was reporting on open and closed roads when I was talking to Frank.
You've seen it on television. Don't come here in person to come and look at this.
We're asking people, stay off the road, stay in your homes, or if you have to evacuate, get out of your homes, and here's where you go, giving that information, and knowing that we were sending our own staff to these places for them to go live, for them to tell people what was going on. And as the news director, my job was to make sure that we could do the job for the public, but keep the people who I work with and who I care about and who I know are doing a great job, keep them safe.
It's something that you had to do. It was a once-in-a-lifetime type deal, and it was something that you just went, you just kept going, and I did keep going.
I think it maybe let us see what our primary goal was every day, because we were, as you recall, we were just on the air from the beginning for a while. We just went till we could go no more. And we kept rotating people so that we tried to have fresh people in to give the information. It may have been a moment that defined us.
The constant coverage to keep you informed meant that as events occurred, you were actually an eyewitness to them, live. Shortly after noon on July 6th, 10 years ago, you saw one of the most dramatic images of the flood of '94.
The boat we just saw on the opening video, I'm kind of speechless, has just gone under. It appeared to be a Macon Bib fire rescue boat. There was a red light on it. That's all I saw.
Who could forget this image during the flood of '94? Members of the Macon-Bibb County Fire Department watch and remember.
Unbelievable, miraculous rescue. That's one of the things I think that's gone unsung in this thing, was the way they got them out of there so quickly. I don't know how much longer they could have held on to those limbs and those trees, but they got the apparatus in there, extended the ladder, and it reached.
Chief Hartley remembers being reached as this unfolded on television after working 36 hours straight.
I probably hadn't been asleep 10 minutes, and the phone rang. And I was the assistant fire chief then, and my boss, Chief Jimmy Henson, was on the other end of the line. And it probably wasn't a pleasant conversation, but I don't blame him. I wouldn't have had a pleasant conversation with my assistant either.
Well, I'm not pleased because we're asking people to stay out of the rivers. We're asking them to stay home, stay away from the flood scene. And yeah, I've got to listen to their side of the story.
It was embarrassing. It was embarrassing to all of us that it occurred. It wasn't our boat, it wasn't our people in the boat, but we felt that we did have a part in it, and that we did have somebody on the boat. And we just thank God, and it was just thank goodness that they lived through it.
As these firefighters reminisce about those hair-raising days, there are things they say the general public never knew about this incident.
These folks were in the business of selling these hovercrafts, and I think that they were trying to prove something. I think they wanted to prove something.
The intentions were good, though, were they not?
Yeah, the intentions were good, but I think they were in addition to being here to help, I think they were here to send a message that, you know, that this was a great vehicle for this use. Unfortunately, our man on the scene was not successful in talking this fella that was driving this hovercraft from getting it out on the river, and of course we see the results of that.
But through it all, lessons were learned.
This particular incident, the hovercraft incident, goes to show us how easy it is for a catastrophe to occur if we're not minding our P's and Q's and thinking safety first.
To watch this live on TV as the craft tipped over and those people went in the water and under the bridge, it just brought home like, this is real. This thing is really dangerous. And if those people aren't doing well with it, then just what can happen to me? So we didn't have any other incidents after that point.
And that's a good thing, since we all learned that the Macon-Bibb County firefighters had many other roles to fill during those 3 weeks.
We've had a little motto quite some time now that we do more than just fight fires, or we don't just fight fires anymore. We are very all hazards, multitasking department that, give us a few minutes and if there's a need, we'll try and fill that niche to make it success, because this community is so important. We know that this organization is built from this community. It's about this community, and whatever we do, our missions are driven to make this community the absolute best it can be. And when this community is in need, we're there to try and fill that need and make sure that this community moves forward, because that's just the type of people we are.
Mary Therese spent several hours with those who participated in that rescue. They say it is a day they'll never forget.
This is one of those kind of things that you see in the movies that you don't expect to happen in Macon, Georgia.
I think we forget, after the trauma is over and we're back in our places.
Of course, the trauma was far from over. For Macon, it was actually just getting started.
Don't use the water that you may have available in your house.
The most vivid memory I have of the flood is trying to have my daughter's wedding on July 9th. The list of things that went wrong could go on, but thankfully the wedding did go on, and my daughter and her husband will be celebrating their 10th wedding anniversary this year, and they have a beautiful 6-year-old daughter of their own. Looking back on it now, I don't know whether I would change a thing.
It's kind of ironic. A flood of water meant no water to drink or do anything else for 21 days. While we were watching the remarkable images during the first days of the flood, another crisis was unfolding along the Ocmulgee River. Macon's water treatment plant was flooded and totally inoperable. And that meant one thing: no water in Macon. No showers, no flushing toilets, and not a drop to drink.
Every day we would run up to Forsyth, take a shower, fill up 40 jugs with water, and come home and try to run the house.
You learn what it is to be without water for 3 weeks almost.
It was extraordinary how much help that we were really getting from everyone.
As a military leader, General Tom Lynn knows about missions, about the teamwork it takes to make everything work when it's a matter of life and death. Some of those lessons he learned during a time he calls one of the great experiences of his life.
Floodwaters swept through Macon and Bibb County in July of 1994.
I came back yesterday to see what damage was done to my home, and I like to pass out when I saw the water so high. I thought, well, I know now that all my furniture, everything is underwater. So I tried not to break down. I say, hey, this is another day.
Another day and more water. There seemed to be water everywhere, yet there was not enough of it at the same time, at least when it came to clean, usable water.
We're just having to limit people to 5 gallons per family, because until such time as more water arrives on the site, we don't know how much water we've got. We've been told the convoy's on the way with a lot of water, but until it gets here, this is what we've got.
One group assigned to bring water to those left high and dry was an Air National Guard unit in the hands of then Lieutenant Colonel George Tom Lynn. Today, he's a brigadier general and the commander of the 116th Air Control Wing at Robins Air Force Base.
We got there on a Sunday evening and set up Task Force Macon the next Monday. The Macon military effort was primarily centered around the purification and the distribution of water, because the whole water plant had been wiped out by the flood.
How long the plant would be down was anyone's guess.
There's no telling. Getting it rebuilt, taking it apart and rebuilding it is one thing, but as you come up, you're going to have problems. I can't even tell you how long it's going to take. We're going around the clock, full shifts. Nobody's leaving the site.
It could be at least 10 days before the people in Macon and Bibb County are able to drink a fresh glass of tap water or even take a hot bath.
In the meantime, General Lynn's unit made sure folks in Bibb County had the water they desperately needed.
They were making some 1 million gallons a day. Whoever needed water we brought them water if they could not come to get water. We also set up distribution points. I think there were about 7 distribution points throughout the city where people could actually drive through.
If you couldn't go to the Air National Guard for your water, they came to you, like Airman Floyd Leach in this mobile water buffalo here in one of Macon's neighborhoods. All that hard work and dedication didn't go unnoticed.
Citizens of Macon bringing people watermelons, home-cooked cakes, thanking them for their generosity and their hard work.
General Lynn won't ever forget those who worked with him either.
They came together with one mission, one focus in mind, and worked incredibly well.
The flood of the century, and for many, enough experiences, hardships, and memories to last a century. Jamie Robb, 13 WMAZ, Eyewitness News.
I thought overall that the people were magnificent as far as putting up with being without water.
Getting Macon's water treatment plant back online seemed almost impossible. One person described it like sinking a ship, then bringing it back to the surface and trying to restore it to brand new. But today, a decade later, there is no chance this could happen again. Chief Meteorologist Chris Smith shows you why.
We had several what we call 100-year floods, and that would always just come up into the parking lot. We would get sandbags out and barricade several buildings and move some things up to higher ground, move things to storage shelves, protect file cabinets. And we just, after going through that a couple of times, we felt like, well, this is the same drill. But, it turned out to be a 500-year flood.
A 500-year flood that left Bibb County residents without water for 19 days and kept Chester Stewart away from his family while he dealt with the aftermath of the flood at his job at the old Riverside treatment plant.
It really, I had worked at the old plant site for 30 years, so it's almost like it happened to my home, really. I remember walking around and where I normally hear the old steam turbines roaring. It was just deathly quiet. You could hear water trickling.
Unfortunately, Bibb County residents could not get a trickle to come out of their faucets. It took Macon Water Authority employees working 24/7 to pump the water out, take the equipment apart, and fix it to get the county something back that those who lived through it will never take for granted again. 40 feet is what the Okmulgee crested at, and that crest forced the Water Authority to look for a new long-term home at Town Creek. With a 6.5 billion gallon reservoir, the new plant provides a lot of benefits, but it also posed a lot of challenges for the employees who worked at the Riverside plant.
It was a lot of new things to learn. There was a lot of old technology, steam-driven equipment. That place was actually built in 1916. We upgraded it some in the 70s, so I was dealing with 1970s technology. We moved over here and we're dealing with state-of-the-art stuff, so it was a very big change for me.
The technology isn't the only benefit of the new plant, says the Water Authority's current director, Gary McCoy.
This plant is designed to treat 60 million gallons, and the demand is really 30. So right now, if for the next 20, 30 years, it'll be fine right now. But we also have the capability of expanding this plant to 90 million gallons.
That storage capacity means Bibb County will be better able to survive a drought and water restrictions.
If we're unable to pump water for 3 months, we will still be fine. So that's why we will, we obey the water restrictions, but the people in Bibb County will have more than enough water even if we're not allowed to pump.
And could there be a repeat of the flood of '94 at the new plant?
Right now, we're above the 500-year flood plain. The whole city of Macon would be underwater before this plant flooded.
Today, the Riverside plant is gone. Just an open 225-acre green space that is slated to become a park and provide a nice, quiet place for Central Georgians to relax along the same river that just 10 years ago changed a community forever.
The Federal Emergency Management Agency helped pay for the new plant. In fact, it was the largest check the government wrote to a public entity, about $67 million. Later this month, the Macon Water Authority hopes to open up the reservoir at the Town Creek plant to public fishing.
I think that may go down as probably the biggest unsung part of the flood, and that was the effort to get that water plant back up and running after it had been flooded. That was the most awesome thing that I've ever seen pulled off in 3 weeks. When we went into that water plant right after the water subsided, It looked like a war zone.
Still ahead, a lot of rebuilding, a lot of volunteers, and a new start across central Georgia.
I've never seen such an outpouring of humanity in my life, in Macon and Bibb County, during my lifetime, like I saw during the flood.
My father and I returned to our homes the next day to find the water was knee-deep in our yards. We waded through the water and peeped in the windows to see our possessions were floating around inside of our home. My girls and I were blessed, however. It was a wonderful couple at our church who brought their motorhome to our house and allowed us to live in it while we dried out our own home.
Once the floodwaters receded, it was time for cleanup, and that cleanup was massive. Joining me now is my 13 WMAZ co-anchor Lori Johnson. Now, Lori, you weren't actually here for the flood.
No, but I certainly heard about it. I was actually working in Texas at the time, but the flood in Georgia, that was national news. Well, I didn't hear about them, but what I found out firsthand since moving here is the way people in central Georgia came together during the flood and afterwards. I heard a lot about that when I interviewed the one man who was responsible for managing this devastating emergency.
We go to North Macon Recreation Center. This was just a beehive of activity in here.
10 years since the flood, and Emergency Management Agency Director Johnny Wingers remembers it like it was yesterday.
See, these phones never quit. They never quit. We had people answer them around the clock, and this went on for about 3 days.
This room was Command Central. It's where Wingers headed up relief efforts.
Made me a lot more aware. I'd only been in here, I'm still a rookie when this happened here, and a little bit here, a little over a year really, and it made me aware of that how quick something can really happen like this. And we're going ahead and evacuate now.
He sent help to people in need.
Water to the dialysis patients, to the hospitals, and porta potties. And that was another ball game altogether. 2,200 porta potties had to be brought in.
He coped with mounting problems.
Then we lost the water plant. That's when the problems really multiplied.
This map kept rescue efforts on track. Looking at the map during the flood, that had to have been pretty overwhelming.
Oh, it was scary. It was absolutely scary. At one time, we were totally locked in Macon, Georgia. All the roads outbound and inbound were flooded.
10 years ago, Riverside Drive looked like a river. Today, it's just an ordinary road until the memories come rushing back.
From where the Waffle House is right here, all the way down there to Corbin Avenue. And I looked out here, there was about 12 to 15 feet of water in the intersection of Pierce. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. The interstate was totally underwater.
It took 2 days for the water to go down.
But when you see something like this, just imagine this intersection totally flooded out here. It's just an awesome sight. It was frightening, very frightening then when I first looked at it.
Even more frightening to live through.
The river is right over here to my right. The water plant is right behind us here. It's calm and all, but I can still remember, close my eyes. I came here one time in a boat. Your heart just went out to these people because they lost a lot of stuff in here. Well, I got very emotional at times. The people wanted to come in. I could tell you a story, but I wouldn't get through it.
If you need help tomorrow, let me know, okay?
There is one common thread in all of those stories. People, complete strangers, reaching out to help each other survive.
It taught us a lesson in humanity, that how wonderful people can be.
Johnny is certainly right about that. We found out about that even in the newsroom. Television stations from all around the country came to Macon to cover the flood. One news crew from Iowa actually brought an enormous cooler of water to our newsroom so we'd have something to drink while we worked.
People came from many other parts of the country, too. They moved, they cleaned, they helped us rebuild our homes and lives. It took a lot of work because the price tag on the flood of '94 kept adding up.
Indeed, it did. The Federal Emergency Management Agency paid out nearly $32 million in disaster relief to families. Nearly 12,000 people had nowhere to live. Temporary shelter alone cost $22 million.
And all damage estimates for the flood of '94 were more than $1 billion.
We really were all in the boat together, and we were trying to paddle up the creek to get there. It makes me realize how lucky we really are to live in a place like Macon and Bibb County.
Still ahead, a final look back.
And a special thank you.
He said, no, I'll never leave Macon. I love Macon, the people of Macon.
the church staff decided our best ministry would be to try to help bring water to the senior adults in our congregation. On the second week of delivering water, I noticed the water had a strong fishy smell. The worker said it had come from a nearby pond, so I delivered the fishy smelling water. "Did you get it from the same place as yesterday?" "Yep, same place," I said. "Do you want me to put it in the bathtub like I did before?" I asked. "Does it have that fishy smell?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am, it does," I answered. "Well, bring it on in. I certainly do need it. But I need to get you to do one more thing before you leave." "What's that?" I asked. "What should I do about that cat outside my bedroom window? He keeps me awake at night."
For those of us who live here, the flood of '94 ranks as one of those where were you when events. Where were you when the rain started? Do you remember when the hovercraft flipped over? What happened at your house? As Suzanne Lawler found out, the flood taught us all a million different lessons.
The main thing I remember was being without water. I always thought it was funny to have a flood, then you'd be without water after that. And it was just amazing to me how the water can actually come up that high, because it flooded all over the interstate. It was blocked off. You couldn't get to run around and flooded out all those bridges there. It was just amazing.
I remember going around the streets and looking at all the houses that got damaged and looking in my backyard, just seeing everything trashed.
I remember going to a friend's house at a different part of the neighborhood, and the house across the street that was starting to get flooded. The water was coming up close to their front porch, and it was kind of scary and exciting at the same time.
The water, so it hit the top of these things. It came up about to there, and I was told that these mats on the floor, that at the time the water was so much water in here, they just floated up to the very top of this thing and were found up there when the water went down.
The Eckarts on Riverside Drive just opened up a couple of weeks before the flood waters washed into town. A couple of blocks away on Delano Drive, the waters also towered pretty high, forcing people to pile their furniture and belongings out on their lawn.
What's it like to be flooded?
Just devastating. Now, 10 years later on Delano Drive, it's hard to believe that such a catastrophic event happened here, unless you talk to the people in these houses. People like Beverly Crouch.
That storage room back there floated off its foundation and floated up here, and no breaking down anything, just floated all the way halfway across the yard there.
Beverly and her husband, both in their 70s back then, had to completely start over and rebuild their house. She still has the pictures and the memories.
I guess the first thing is walking in the house and seeing all the destruction and how everything was just full of muck. We just weren't going to give up. That's all. We couldn't think of going anywhere else. We'd lived here for 50-something years. Some of that stuff was up in the attic.
The stuff is special since Beverly lost her husband, the World War II veteran, 4 years ago. But she'll never forget how he and countless other people all pitched in and started working to rebuild their lives after the flood.
People from up over near Atlanta would come down on the weekend. They had young people from Rock Eagle, I believe it is, and they'd come down on the weekend and work in the house. To think so many people would do things for us and bring us things, and they'd come in one time, they came in with a sofa for the living room.
And now, 10 years later, that's what lives on. The gratefulness to everyone who joined together to help rebuild a town.
It made you feel like there are an awful lot of good people in this world, and you don't really appreciate it till they are helping you. And that's a bad way to be. You need to think about them without them waiting on you. It just makes you feel so good to know that people are that caring. And you're gonna make me cry if you don't quit.
Tears of thankfulness, still right there, 10 years after the flood. Suzanne Lawler, 13 WMAZ, Eyewitness News.
I've already told you where I was, right here. And I had a lot of company in the station. But there was one person who was right here with me, and usually a step ahead of me. He was our senior weather forecaster, Bill Powell. Bill died of cancer nearly 4 years ago, so he can't share his memories of the flood of '94 with you, but we certainly can. Senior forecaster Bill Powell is joining us now.
Heavy showers and light showers out there, and we now have a surplus for the year of 9.95. The Okmulgee, it crested at 35.3 feet yesterday, and we're not out of the woods yet.
Bill Powell's wife, Sandy Shoemaker, and his daughter remember what the flood of '94 meant to Bill.
That's when he lost all his nervousness and he forgot himself and just got into the process of being a weatherman. And that's when, to me, he also became the weatherman in Macon. That's when he felt the most useful.
He always talked about the people, how generous they were and how good they were. I mean, and WMAZ just gave him the opportunity to meet more people in Macon, I think. Because when he was offered a job in Chicago, he just flat turned it down. He said, no, I'll never leave Macon. I love Macon, the people of Macon.
The flood of '94 was the most devastating natural disaster ever to strike central Georgia. But as you've heard, it was also a time that brought out the best in us, a spirit of dedication, a spirit of commitment to our fellow man. For us here at 13 WMAZ, we think one man symbolized that commitment. In his honor, we dedicate this show to the memory of Bill Powell. Thanks for watching.
So hopefully we can make it best out of a bad situation.
I volunteered my truck to bring it down here for them. Just come to help people out.
And we've had these volunteers, folks, I don't know who they are. I don't know how they knew about us, but they've come out here to help.
It has given a lot of us an opportunity to meet people that we probably would have never met, and we've been able to be a witness to them and to help them in their time of need.
How y'all doing? My hat's off to them. They have worked almost around the clock. A lot of these people, 2 and 3 hours sleep at night, and they fight the next morning, and they've done a super job.
We feel alive. That's the best thing we can have.